Why democracy is failing in Africa? Hello, explorers! Welcome to another informative video presented to you by the Explorer, and thanks for watching. In this video, we shall examine why democracy in Africa is failing. Democracy is a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Since its introduction into the African way of governance by the colonial masters, democracy has been a hard nut to crack, given its foreign nature as well as the representative often chosen to. For example, most African presidential elections are just formalities. Because of the elections held usually, a very few percentages of them actually get to see power change hands. With the glued-to-seat attitude most African leaders portray when it comes to change of power, one can begin to wonder if democracy and the rule of law is anything the current leadership sees as valid or worth emulating. We may start to wonder where this attitude of non-willingness to change regime emanates from, and the answer will only take us back to one place: colonialism. But to understand why democracy is failing in Africa, we need to first understand what democracy is. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and turn notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. What is democracy and how is it judged? Democracy in Africa is measured by a variety of indexes, primarily devised by non-governmental organizations, such as Freedom House in the World Index and the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Index. Both organizations measure a range of factors including human rights, property rights, and free elections to determine the status of states as free, partially free, or not free. The Freedom Index ranks states based on the protection of political and civil liberties and freedoms that individuals are entitled to and receive. In 2018, the index found that the majority of sub-Saharan African states, including Sudan, Cameroon, and Ethiopia, were not free, while several states including Namibia, Botswana, and Ghana were pronounced free. The states that fell under the free category were deemed democratic, as they presented the hallmarks of freedom, including upholding the values and institutions central to democracy, such as the freedom to participate in elections. The African Political Review. The integration of democracy in Africa is something some academic scholars place to have occurred in fairly recent history, as a result of historical processes like decolonization and the collapse of communism. In 2013, Gilferson wrote that democratic systems of government saw substantial increases when communist regimes in Europe fell, which had the knock-on effects of increasing the number of democracies across the African continent. He states that the number of democracies in Africa rose from 4 to 17, while the number of autocracies fell down to single digits. And this trend escalated because of the advantages which were supposedly attached to democracy. The advantages of incorporating a democratic system of government over autocratic regimes include reducing the likelihood of corruption, according to Gilferson, who states that democracy tends to hinder corruption and help growth by promoting education and governance in the public interest. But when the attitudes of most African leaders who are leading in supposed democracies are investigated into, the opposite of what democracy is supposed to be is exactly what is being experienced. Democratization occurred in African states like Ghana when governments were democratically elected through party systems, which they present to be a hallmark of gauging democracy. There is a variety of explanations throughout the scholarly discourse on what prompted democratization in Africa, given that the effects of what it is supposed to bring about are on a rapid downhill. One key indicator of democracy being introduced to Africa was the introduction of multi-party elections in most African countries during the 90s. Prior to democracy, most post-colonial states were thought to have been authoritarian, which was challenged by internal and external factors, including volatile circumstances socially and economically. According to most writers' accounts, stark divisions of ethnicity, religion, class, and region across African states were a key impediment to the democratic management of state affairs, which has been since overcome to an extent, with numerous states being identified as free by Freedom House, but the tides have been switching up. The switching trends in Africa's leadership style. The contemporary systems of governance across the African continent are diverse, hence when discussing a topic as broad as democracy in Africa, it is important to consider individual states as a key unit of analysis, which indices of freedom in the world have modeled. The NGO Freedom House classifies the systems of governance in Africa to encompass democratic, autocratic, and hybrid regimes. Through employing the various indices used to measure democracy, Political commenters, NGOs, and academics suggest it to be evident that current systems of governance incorporate elements of democracy. However, they may need to commit further systematic and institutional change to be classified democratic, hence the category of hybrid regimes. Hybrid regimes is a term in Democracy Index from the Economist Intelligence Unit, EIU in the UK, which examines states that have both authoritarian and democratic institutions, and patterns of governing and organizing its central political and economic processes. You may start to wonder how democracy in Africa is now transforming into hybrid regimes, but a look at how most African leaders behave is evident enough. Take, for example, most of Africa's presidents who behave like monarchs ruling for decades to their death. Some go as far as changing the constitution of their country in order to rule longer, neglecting thousands of their citizens dying under civil and crisis and wars just for power. Coup d'etats have been popular in Africa despite the growing talks of democracy. Coup d'etats have reduced to a good number, but one thing which African leaders still find hard to do is handing over power. Even though more and more elections are being held in Africa, however, analysts dismiss many as being lawful but illegitimate. Although studies show that the majority of Africans still want to live in democracies, an increasing number are looking to alternatives, which are autocratic models. One of the most logical rationales for this behavior is because there are fewer financial supports and assurances against political indictments once they are out of office. We cannot completely say that there have not been any African leaders who have set great examples of what leaders should be. Since its inception in 2007, the Mo Ibrahim Prize has been awarded to only 5 laureates, including former South African President Nelson Mandela and Joaquim Chissano of Mozambique. To qualify for the award, a leader must have left office in the last 3 years and must have developed his country, strengthened democracy and human rights, and paved the way to sustainable and equitable prosperity. Qualifications which are far too high for most African leaders. The tides of democracy in Africa are changing, with some countries organizing free and fair elections, with successful transition of power. Despite the challenges in maintaining democracy in Africa, at least 68% of Africans prefer to live in open and freer societies, where there is more dividends from democracy, less corruption, more transparency, less impunity, and more economic opportunity, and it is in the interest of external partners to push for and to support this quest, lest the non-liberal democratic models of national development become more alluring. However, some have given up on democracy, as Malian music legend Salif Keita suggests that the continent needs a benevolent dictator like China. To have a democracy, people have to understand democracy. And how can people understand when 85% of the people in the country cannot even read or write, he asked. Looking at the change in democratic trends in Africa, one is tempted to say it has been on a constant regression. In 1991, Benin and Zambia became the first former one-party states to hold multi-party elections in Africa, which were won by opposition parties, kicking off a decade of democratic gains on the continent after the end of the Cold War. Almost 30 years later, the West African country is rated as one of just 9 free countries out of the 54 on the continent, while Zambia has regressed to being partly free according to the 2019 Freedom House report. The number of free countries remains the same as a decade ago: Senegal, Ghana, Benin, Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, and Mauritius, while Tunisia has improved from partly free, but Mali and Lesotho have moved in the opposite direction. But then, every African country wishes to be on the list of free countries, despite their acts, and some are putting actual efforts to afford the title. Given that the political transition through regular elections is among the criteria for judging whether a country is a democracy or not, some countries have even adopted technology to make the polls credible and accountable. But in most cases, this has done little to dispel concerns. Some have suggested the Rwandan model, where democracy cynics like Salif Keita propose a benevolent autocracy as an alternative. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame has been used as an example of a leader who is running an effective and efficient government that is unencumbered by democratic structures which can be slow and rigid. However, extending the control of a governing party, as in Rwanda, over a country's economy is more likely to increase corruption and waste than to spur economic activity. This means that if other countries on the continent try to implement the Rwandan model, the chances are that they will experience all of its cost, while realizing fewer of its benefits. But no matter the approach taken, the focus should be on giving more and more people a say over more and more issues, instead of comparing how each country's governance structure measures against Western democracies. The good news is that support for democracy remains high. The worry is that it is not guaranteed unless Africans start enjoying the dividends of living in free and open societies and participating in elections that are credible and accountable. But until then, Africa's democracy is still at the level of less than a desirable item on the continent's plate. There you have it, explorers. That is why democracy is failing in Africa. Thanks for watching this video, and if you did enjoy this video, don't want to give it a thumbs up. Do not forget to subscribe and share with your friends.